The morning sun peeked through the curtains of Elon Musk's bedroom, casting soft golden light across the room. He sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through his phone, reading comments from people discussing public transportation. Elon Musk doesn't understand real commuting. He only talks about tunnels and high-speed trains, but has he ever been on a packed subway during rush hour? The words lingered in his mind. It was true. He had spent years working on futuristic transport solutions, but had he ever really experienced the daily struggles of an average commuter? He had read reports, seen statistics, and even invested in projects to make public transport better. But numbers on a screen couldn't tell the real story. He exhaled sharply and made a sudden decision. Today, he would find out for himself. He opened his closet and picked out a simple hoodie, a pair of worn-out jeans, and sneakers. No designer suits, no Tesla, no bodyguards, just him, blending in with the crowd. As he pulled the hoodie over his head, he glanced at his reflection in the mirror. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't the billionaire CEO. He wasn't the face of Tesla or SpaceX. Today, he was just another guy trying to get from point A to point B. Slipping his phone into his pocket, he grabbed a few dollar bills. No credit cards, no assistance. He wanted the full experience. With one last look at his quiet, luxurious home, he stepped outside. The moment he closed the door behind him, a strange feeling crept in. For the first time in years, Elon Musk was about to enter a world he had only seen from a distance. Elon walked down the street, hands in his hoodie pockets, feeling an unusual sense of anonymity. No cameras, no reporters, no fans rushing up for selfies, just another face in the crowd. As he approached the nearest bus stop, he slowed down. A small group of people had already gathered, some staring at their phones, others looking tired from the morning rush. A mother rocked her baby gently in her arms, while an older man leaned against the pole, his eyes half closed. Elon stood among them, unnoticed. He glanced around, taking in the surroundings. The bench was covered in faint graffiti, and a few crumpled receipts lay scattered on the ground. The schedule board flickered slightly, its LED display showing minor delays. A low grumble of frustration came from a man checking his watch. Probably late for work, Elon thought. Minutes later, the bus approached. It was old, its paint slightly faded, and as it stopped, the doors let out a loud hiss before creaking open. Then, the chaos began. People pushed forward all at once, trying to squeeze in before the bus filled up. Elon hesitated for a second, thrown off by the aggressive rush. He had always imagined boarding a bus was a simple process. Wait, step in, take a seat. But this was different. He stepped inside, gripping the railing for balance. The air inside was thick and warm. The seats were already occupied, so he grabbed a pole and stood near the back. The driver barely glanced at him before pulling away, causing Elon to stumble slightly. He steadied himself. So this is what daily commuting feels like. The journey had just begun. As the bus moved forward, Elon adjusted his grip on the pole, trying to maintain balance. Every sudden stop jolted him, making him realize just how rough the ride was. The air inside felt heavy. The small vents above barely pushed out any cool air, and the heat from so many bodies packed together made it worse. He pulled his hoodie down slightly, feeling a trickle of sweat forming on his forehead. He glanced around. A mother sat near the window, rocking her baby, whispering soft words to calm the child's cries. Her eyes looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept in days. An elderly man stood nearby, gripping the seat handle with trembling hands. No one offered him a seat. Elon watched as people avoided eye contact, pretending not to notice. Maybe they're too tired to care, he thought. At the next stop, more people squeezed in. The space got tighter, and Elon felt the weight of someone's backpack pressing against his side. No one apologized. No one even looked up. It was just part of the routine. A sharp jolt sent passengers stumbling forward. Elon barely caught himself. A young woman next to him muttered under her breath but kept scrolling on her phone. No one complained. His eyes landed on the small digital fare display near the driver. The numbers kept changing as people tapped their cards. A man grumbled about the rising bus fares, shaking his head. Elon took a deep breath. He had read about these issues before: overcrowding, discomfort, rising costs, but reading reports was nothing compared to feeling it firsthand. This wasn't just a commute, it was a daily struggle. When the bus finally reached his stop, Elon stepped off, inhaling the fresh air as if he had just escaped a pressure chamber. The difference was immediate: space, movement, and a moment to breathe. But his journey wasn't over. He turned toward the entrance of the subway station. The stairs leading underground were crowded, people rushing up and down, their faces tense with urgency. As he descended, the air grew thicker, warmer. The smell of metal, sweat, and something faintly musty filled the space. At the ticket machines, Elon paused. The screens flashed confusing options: single ride, unlimited pass, peak hours, off-peak fares. He watched as an older woman hesitated, pressing buttons, her frustration growing. A teenager behind her sighed loudly, shifting impatiently. Elon dug into his pocket, pulling out a few crumpled bills, but then he noticed most machines only took cards. He glanced around, spotting a small kiosk with a line of people waiting to buy tickets with cash. Another delay. With a swipe of a borrowed card from a kiosk attendant, he finally got through. The turnstile clicked and he pushed forward, stepping onto the crowded platform. Heat radiated from the packed space. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he stood shoulder to shoulder with strangers. A loudspeaker crackled overhead, announcing a train delay. Groans erupted from the crowd, but no one seemed surprised. Minutes later, headlights flickered in the tunnel. The subway screeched to a stop, its doors sliding open. The rush began. People shoving in, no order, no space to hesitate. Elon took a deep breath and stepped inside. Within seconds, he was pressed between bodies, barely able to move. So this was the underground world millions faced every single day. The subway doors slid shut with a dull thud, sealing Elon inside the packed train. There was no room to move. His arms were pinned to his sides, his backpack pressed against someone's shoulder. The air was thick with body heat, the scent of sweat lingering in the confined space. A robotic voice announced the next stop, barely audible over the muffled conversations, rustling bags, and the screeching of metal wheels against the tracks. The train lurched forward, causing a domino effect of bodies swaying into each other. Elon barely managed to stay balanced. His hand reached for a pole, but it was already occupied by 3 others, fingers overlapping in a silent battle for grip. A man next to him let out a frustrated sigh. "Every day, same nightmare," he muttered under his breath. Elon glanced around. A woman in business attire leaned against the door, her eyes closed, exhaustion written all over her face. A construction worker, still in his dusty uniform, checked his watch anxiously. A student held onto a strap, flipping through pages of a textbook, trying to study despite the chaos. The train screeched to a halt at the next station. The doors opened, but instead of people stepping off, more crammed in. Elon felt someone's elbow dig into his back, but there was no room to adjust. The doors beeped aggressively before slamming shut. No complaints, no protests, just quiet acceptance. Elon felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just a ride. It was survival. Every single day. The train jerked forward again. His destination was still far, but the journey was already teaching him more than any research paper ever could. Elon kept his eyes on the people around him, absorbing every detail. Each face told a story of exhaustion, determination, silent frustration. He had always thought about public transport in terms of efficiency, speed, and cost, but now he saw the human side of it. A young mother stood near him, holding a toddler on her hip, while gripping the overhead strap with her other hand. The child's head rested on her shoulder, eyes half closed. She swayed slightly with the train's motion, looking too tired to speak. Across from her, a man in a worn-out uniform tapped his phone. Elon peeked at the screen. Bank app open, balanced dangerously low. The man sighed and locked his phone, staring blankly at the subway map above. A teenager in the corner had headphones on, lost in music, using it as a shield against the noise around him. Next to him, an elderly woman sat with a plastic grocery bag on her lap, her hands folded neatly over it. Her eyes darted around nervously as if she feared missing her stop. Elon's thoughts drifted. He had spent years designing innovations to fix public transport, but had he ever considered the people behind the numbers? The ones for whom this wasn't just an option, but a necessity? Another announcement crackled over the speaker. Service delays due to signal issues ahead. A wave of groans spread through the train, but no one seemed surprised. Elon felt the frustration in the air. This was normal for them. Delays, overcrowding, discomfort, it was all just part of life. He had expected inconvenience. What he hadn't expected was the silent struggle beneath it all. The train slowed down again, but this time it stopped between stations. The lights flickered slightly, and the robotic voice announced another delay. Elon glanced around. No one reacted with shock or anger. A few people sighed, some shook their heads, but most just stood there, waiting. This was routine. A man near him muttered, "Gonna be late again." He pulled out his phone and started typing a message, probably an apology to his boss. Elon noticed the time. It had already been much longer than expected. He thought about his own schedule. If a meeting ran late, his team simply adjusted. If he needed to be somewhere fast, he had a private jet waiting. For these people, one late train could mean missing work, losing pay, or even getting fired. A woman next to him took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment before dialing a number. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly, forcing a smile. "Mommy's stuck on the train again, but I'll be home soon, okay?" Elon felt something tighten in his chest. The train suddenly jerked forward, snapping him out of his thoughts. People adjusted their grips, bracing for the movement. A teenager lost balance and bumped into an older man. "Sorry," he mumbled, straightening up. Elon exhaled slowly. For millions, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a system they had no choice but to rely on. And that system, on most days, barely worked for them. He had spent years building technology for the future, but what about the people struggling right now? For the first time, he questioned whether his vision of transportation was really solving the problems that mattered most. As the train continued its journey, Elon couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. The faces around him were worn and tired, every movement an act of endurance. The stifling heat, the crowded space, and the constant delays seemed to weigh heavily on everyone. The woman with the toddler had her eyes half closed now, struggling to keep her balance while still holding her child. Elon couldn't help but wonder how many parents like her had to face these daily challenges, juggling work, kids, and the brutal reality of public transport. A group of young workers, dressed in uniforms, laughed quietly amongst themselves. But their smiles didn't reach their eyes. They were tired. They'd probably been awake for hours, hustling through the day, only to face another long ride home. At the next stop, more people crammed in. A man with a suitcase tried to push through the crowd, his face turning red as he struggled to find a spot. He sighed and stood in the narrow aisle, his eyes glazed with frustration. Elon watched it all unfold, a constant cycle of exhaustion, frustration, and resignation. No one complained out loud. The silence spoke volumes. As the train rattled along, he realized how much people had to endure just to get to work, to take care of their families, to live their lives. The whole system seemed designed to grind people down, not lift them up. Elon's thoughts were interrupted when the train made another unexpected stop. He glanced around. No one seemed surprised. They just waited, numb to the disruption, resigned to the routine. This wasn't just about delays. It was about the human cost of a broken system. And the more he witnessed, the more it hit him. This wasn't just a problem, it was a crisis. As the train moved slowly toward the next station, Elon found himself lost in thought. He had always believed that innovation was the solution to the world's problems. Faster cars, electric buses, tunnels beneath the city, and trains that could take you across vast distances in minutes. But the reality before him felt different. This wasn't about creating something faster or sleeker. It was about making the everyday easier, better, and more humane. A man standing next to Elon shifted uncomfortably, his briefcase wedged between his feet. Another passenger stepped on his shoe, and the man didn't even look up. The subway train continued its rickety ride, with a sense of quiet desperation hanging in the air. Elon had designed technology to make things faster, more efficient, and more luxurious. He'd revolutionized industries. But today, as he stood in the cramped, hot subway, he began to question the heart of his work. Had he missed something? These people weren't looking for a faster way to move, they were looking for relief. They needed better options to make their daily routines bearable. It wasn't about luxury, it was about accessibility, affordability, and dignity. His mind raced. He realized how detached he had become from the daily struggles of the people he was designing for. He hadn't been listening to the voices of those who needed change the most. He had been so focused on building the future that he forgot to address the reality of the present. The subway train screeched to a halt. Elon's chest tightened. He had spent years imagining the future, but today he realized that real change began by understanding the struggles of the present. This wasn't just a ride, it was a wake-up call.